Most of the difficult decisions that you're going to face in a typical hand of poker will come after the flop. It's easy enough to learn what a good hand is before the flop and how you should play them, but there are even more variables after the flop since there's so many more possibilities. Here's a list of some dangerous flops along with some advice on how you should proceed. First, the paired flop. A paired flop can either be a really good safe flop for you or a flop of death. Let's say you started with a pair of pocket kings and the flop comes down queen 7-7. In this situation, you have two pair, kings and sevens. Obviously, if nobody has a 7 in their hand, you're likely in excellent shape here unless one of your opponents started with queens or aces. Since there are no draws on the board, it's a pretty straightforward situation. That is, unless somebody raises you. Now that beautiful pair of kings you have might be up against a hand like ace-queen or could easily be drawing to one of two remaining kings left in the deck if your opponent has the trip sevens. The best way to approach a flop like this with an overpair is to go ahead and bet, but if you receive any resistance from an opponent, you should proceed cautiously. Don't go crazy raising and re-raising. Be happy to just call the hand down and hope your opponent has a pair of queens rather than 3 sevens. Next is the coordinated flop. A coordinated flop is one where there is a 3-card straight present, something like queen 10-8, for example. Let's say you held a pair of aces and there were 3 callers. A flop like this is extremely dangerous since it hits a range of cards that your opponents might call with. Hands like queen jack, queen 10, jack 9, pocket 8s are all hands that your opponent could feasibly have in this hand. While 3 out of the 4 hands I mentioned already have your aces beat, even the first hand, queen jack, isn't too far behind your aces. If a 9, jack, or a queen come in the next 2 cards, he'd beat you too. In fact, your aces are only a 2-to-1 favorite over the queen jack on that flop. The more players that are in the pot before the flop, the more often a big pair will end up a loser. The goal on the flop is to try to narrow the field down by raising aggressively. But if the turn card is bad, like a 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king, it's time to play very cautiously, even if that means folding. Third is when there's a flush on the flop. When the flop comes with 3 of the same suit, playing an overpair without one of the suit can be very tricky. For this example, let's say you started with jack of clubs, jack of spades, and the flop came 8, 6, deuce of hearts. While you do have a nice overpair, one more heart on the turn, and your strong overpair will likely be meaningless. The best way to approach a hand like this is, again, to bet the flop, but don't get too aggressive in raising. By all means, you can raise all you want on the flop, but if someone has the big heart in their hand, chances are they're going to call you anyway. It's often better to play cautiously on the flop since there are still 2 cards to come. And if a safe card comes in the turn, that's when you might decide to punish your opponent who's drawing to a flush. Now, if there are too many players in the pot, you might be better off folding right away on the flop. If there are 6 callers before the flop, it stands to reason there's a decent chance that one of your opponents may have hit their flush right on the flop. If it's bet and raised in front of you, I would actually suggest folding. Even if your pair of jacks are still in the lead, somehow, okay, you still have to fade 2 more cards. If either is a heart, you'd likely lose the hand anyway.